Hello and welcome to The Noise in Your Head. I'm your host, Josh Timpko, here to bring you your weekly dose of indie news, reviews, and recommendations. Being that this is the first episode, I thought it more than fitting to review one of the saddest fucking albums I have ever heard. So we have that to look forward to, as well as some recommendations to hold you over for the week, and then we'll conclude with a preview for next week's episode. So, without further ado, here's a little review of Mount Eerie's new album, A Crow Looked at Me. Alright, so let's begin with, so let's start with talking about how music portrays sadness typically. You'll notice that there's usually, some sort of barrier at all times between that somewhat protects the listener from whatever sadness the singer is discussing. Now, A Crow Looked at Me by Mount Eerie removes that barrier completely, and what's left is some of the most heart-wrenching music there is, and honestly, it sets a new precedent for what a tragic album should live up to. And I think that for years to come, people are constantly going to be comparing sad albums to this one, saying, well, yeah, it's sad, but is it A Crow Looked at Me sad? And the person will say, oh God, no. Are you kidding me? So, for a little bit of background on the album, singer-songwriter Phil Elverum, he underwent a horrible, horrible tragedy with the death of his wife, Genevieve, in, I believe, July of last year, due to pancreatic cancer. Phil and Genevieve had a GoFundMe that sought out help from fan donations to help pay for the treatments, and after they had achieved their goal, actually received well beyond what they had asked, the news came out that Genevieve had passed away. Now, this album makes no claims to be anything but a reflection, a meditation on not just death, the death of Phil's wife, but the concept of death in general and the grieving process. And I know at this point, I may have turned some listeners off. It's easy to put on the blinders and focus on the positive side of life. Of course, you can feel incredibly bad for Phil and wish him the best, but prefer not to subject yourself to such an album. But if you stick with me, I think I could at least explain the importance of this album, because while I don't know if I'll I don't know if I'll include this album on my best albums at the end of the year list, it is one that's going to be in the back of my head knowing that it should be on that list. So, I'll get it out of the way. The instrumentals on this album are very soothing and simple, okay? While some may use this as a criticism, I choose to recognize that there's an intention behind it. This is less of a music album and more of a public diary reading, if you will. So for this review, I'm going to be focusing solely on the lyrics and the meanings of those lyrics, because if I'm going to be making any leaps in this episode, it's to say that that's what Phil intends us all to do. So I want to start with the very first track, Real Death, because Phil packs this album with gut punch after gut punch, and right off the bat, he drills the themes into us with the words, death is real, someone's there and then they're not. It's not for singing about, it's not for making art. When real death enters the house, all poetry is dumb. When I walk into the room where you were and look into the emptiness instead, all fails. My knees fail, my brain fails, words fail. Now, Phil, on this song, as well as throughout the entire album, is very self-aware of what's going on. And he knows what he's doing. He's being blunt. He's being honest and to the point. And I'll say this now, there's no bright side on this album, because that's the reality that Phil has been living for almost a year now. Phil is known to be a very poetic, metaphorical writer, and none of that is anywhere to be seen on this album. So often we're given words of encouragement in albums like this, but in Phil's eyes, at least for the time being, life is a gloomy, bitter place where one minute your best friend can be there and the next they could be gone forever. The final lyrics to this song are, when I first questioned whether I was ready for what was to come. He says, talking about death, it's dumb, and I don't want to learn anything from this. I love you. So this is a side of death that we do not get to see often in music. He doesn't want to come out of this situation a stronger person, a better father, a better musician. He doesn't want to go on and think back and not have Genevieve in his life. He wants her, plain and simple. Nothing poetic about it, just a man laying it out for everyone. At this point, I nearly broke down. I'm not going to lie. I nearly broke down at this point. At this man's love for his wife. So speaking of heartbreaking moments, which this album is full of, the song My Chasm, the final words are Phil saying, "Death is real," but whereas throughout the entire song, and throughout the entire album, when he maintains this monotone spoken word-like style of singing, but at the end of My Chasm, when he says death is real, he breaks down himself, and he decides that that's the take that he's going to go with. It's moments like this that just bring out the reality of the situation. It's one thing for him to sing about crying, but to hear his voice crack and waver in those last words bring a new level of oh shitness to what is already a very contemplative, tough to listen to, introspective album. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go through every song on this album, although I would love to, and someday I just might. Throughout the album, Phil brings us through the immediate and intimate moments after the death of his wife, I should say. He talks about getting the mail and seeing a package that his wife had ordered and breaking down right there on the front porch. Many times he makes reference to animals and nature, asking if it's her watching over him. He sings about talks that he has with his daughter, selling Genevieve's clothes, throwing away her underwear. He questions whether people are getting tired of him talking about his dead wife. In fact, one of my favorite moments, if I can even use the word favorite when talking about this album, is when Phil talks about how he hadn't taken the upstairs garbage out since she died, and months later he finally does. He really knows how to make things that you wouldn't expect to be significant. He paints a whole new picture of grief and the process after death. One that should be truly admired and listened to carefully, especially for those that may have never been through a terrible loss like this. Many people have said this about this album by now, but I believe that it's truly worth repeating. I truly wish that this album did not exist, because that would mean that Phil was okay, that none of this tragedy would have occurred. But the reality is that it has happened, and we do have this album as a testament. So often I want to turn away. I yearn for an instrumental break or something to push this guy off of me. But then I catch myself and think what horrible things that imply about me. Not to say that anyone out there is horrible for not listening to this album or not wanting to listen to this album. But when you begin this record, you are essentially signing up for what feels like a psychiatrist session. And you, no matter how uncomfortable you are, you know you can't leave this grieving man here alone. And this is a feat in and of itself, one that I'm almost certain Phil had no intention of. He doesn't expect you to stay out of pity or because you feel bad for him. Which brings up the question of what does Phil want? Because I believe that Phil wants you to know how much he loves his wife, how much it hurts that she's gone, how much death absolutely fucking sucks, and how we shouldn't shield ourselves from it, because there's going to be a time when we can't. There's going to be a time where we can't hit the pause button, where we can't just listen to another album, because the death is there. I can go on and on about this album specifically, but I'd like to conclude with a few points about what this album means to me, because it was very unexpected and almost ignited my desire to start this new podcast. I felt that I needed some outlet to discuss this album. In true Phil Elverum fashion, I'd like to be blunt and open about the things that this album has made me think about. For starters, I've begun to cherish the relationships I've had a lot more and think about what they mean to me, and truly try to embody those feelings when interacting with those that I care about and love. Who knows how long they'll be there? You can honestly never be so sure of these things. Rather than live in despair over this fact, this album makes me want to use my time wisely in regard to my friendships and relationships, which I believe to be an important message to anyone out there going through tragedy or not. The second point I'd like to make is that not only did this album make me cherish the personal relationships I have with those around me, but also cherish the lives and emotions of those that I don't know around me. So often you hear things on the news about the death of someone or a plane crash or what have you. You want to forget it. You want to remind yourself that that's happening somewhere else. But a piece of art like A Crow Looked at Me doesn't allow for that separation. It doesn't allow for that distance between you and the tragedy. I never knew Genevieve, but I wish with all my heart that she was alive today. And I said it before, and I'll say it again, I wish this album did not exist. Phil communicates the realities of death more tangibly than any artist I can think of today on this album. If you made it this far into the episode, hopefully you'll take this information and give this thing a chance, with the added asterisk that this is not a repeat listen album. This is not a sing-along album. This is not a listen and forget album. This is an experience that you need to be ready for. And I cannot, and hopefully never have to, although I know this is wishful thinking, fully understand what Phil has gone through and is still going through. Phil is an artist who has captured the essence of grief in a way that I've never seen before. And he gets us, I believe, as close to understanding as possible. And with that, I leave you to decide to listen to this album for yourself. And I understand if after hearing all of this, you don't want to. It was certainly hard enough recording this just now because it's not such a pretty topic. Maybe this album will find you when you need it most, and for the fact alone that this exists is because a truly brave man allowed it to. And I believe that this isn't the last you'll be hearing of this album, either for me or in everyday life. It's certainly taking the indie world by storm, and it's only a matter of time before people do recognize the power of it. And to Phil, this last bit goes out to you. I hope that you're okay. I hope you're as okay as you can be right now. And I'm fully aware, and I fully understand that may very well be asking too much of you.
Bleeding and afraid, full of love, calling out from.
Oh, right. So yeah, that was sad. What a great way to start, and kick off this podcast. So now I'm gonna give you guys some rapid fire, what I've been listening to this week and what you should be listening to this week. The title is subject to change for sure. And this week, as will be the case in the future, I will have links to all the Bandcamp pages or Spotify pages, so you guys can listen to what I'm listening to. Those will all be posted in the show notes and the description, depending on where you're listening to this. So first, a big recommendation for the first full-length record from the emo punk band from Minnesota, Remo Drive. The album is titled Greatest Hits, and it's a fantastic debut from these guys, and there's some awesome catchy lyrics and easily recognizable instrumentals throughout. I mean, there's some album standouts for me are songs like You're Killin' Me, I'm My Own Doctor, Art School, and Eat Shit. But yeah, do yourself a favor and go support these guys. I'm super excited for whatever they do next. It totally took me by surprise. But yeah, if you're kind of a fan of this sort of emo punk revival that's been going on in the last couple of years, I think Remo Drive is right up your alley. Up next, and I should preface that this whole recommendations segment of the podcast is not devoted to new releases. I know I just mentioned a new release, but I'll be recommending a lot of older stuff too, because I'm constantly listening to music, new and old. So when I come across something that I think you guys will enjoy, I'll bring it up no matter what. If you already know it, that's great. If not, even better. But up next we have the album Alligator by The National.
He'll know the trick to get away with, soul to change his ways. It's a common fetish for a doting man. To ballerina on the coffee table, cock in hand.
Who've been around since 1999. They've got tons of albums out. They formed in Ohio back in 1999. And I once heard someone describe The National as that feeling when you're a few beers in and you're not quite buzzed yet, but you know it'll be coming soon, and you're waiting for that moment, and you're kind of experiencing it firsthand. Oh, hello. I cannot attest to that feeling since I don't drink, but I thought I'd at least pass the description on to you, and you guys could let me know if it's an apt description. And last but not least, we have the album Reconstruction Site by the Weakerthans. They're an indie rock group from up north, meaning Canada, and it's just chill, walking to class type of album with some really beautiful lyricism. Give that album a listen, and you could use it as a palate cleanser, if you will, after listening to A Crow Looked at Me. Trust me, you're going to need something to lift those spirits up after you listen to that. Quick preview of next week's coming attractions. I actually have a pretty interesting topic coming up next week. We're going to be talking about the separation of artists from the art. There is an artist who released an album this past weekend that you can go both ways on. You can go both ways on how you feel about this artist. I know I certainly have friends who will never listen to an album by this guy again. And then I have those like myself. I have myself that think that there should be some separation from artists from their art. And we'll be talking about that. I'll have a guest on next week, and we'll be discussing that album. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but we'll be discussing that album. So you can look forward to that. As you probably know, this whole podcast, The Noise in Your Head, is a sister show to the Take Up Real podcast, which is, I'm assuming, how you found us. So, on that same train of thought, you could find all the episodes of The Noise in Your Head. This is the first one, but in the future you'll be able to find them at thetakeupreal.com. We are going to be starting a separate Twitter for The Noise in Your Head. We'll also probably be starting a separate Facebook page for The Noise in Your Head. But until that happens, you can find all the stuff you need at Take Up Real on Twitter, or you can just look up the Take Up Real on Facebook, and you could find all the notices there. If you like what I've been doing for this one episode, comment your thoughts. Let me know what you thought of any of the albums that I discussed. Especially let me know what you thought of A Crow Looked at Me. I'm interested to hear people's thoughts on the matter. And if you have any other sad albums, send them my way. I mean, I know everyone kind of jumps towards Carrie and Lowell by Sufjan Stevens, as well as others. But sad albums are great, and I think A Crow Looked at Me is sort of a new sort of sad album. It really does kind of set a precedent, in my opinion. Let me know if you agree. If you don't agree, just let me know. Let me know what you want me to listen to. I'm fully open to taking suggestions. If you guys have any suggestions based on the albums and artists that I've mentioned today, let me know and I'll listen. I'll give you a shout out, and I'll let you know what I thought of your recommendations. That about does it for this episode 1 of The Noise in Your Head, and I'll see you next week.
Looking ahead to a future you must have known deep down would not include you. Though you clawed at the cliff you were sliding down, being swallowed into a silence that's bottomless and real. It's dumb, and I don't want to learn anything from this. I love you.